A young girl set out to sell cookies to her neighbors, just like she had done so many times before. But this time, she never came home. As soon as word spread, the entire community sprang into action. Hundreds of people, neighbors, friends, even complete strangers, joined the police searching every street, backyard, and park. But Joan was nowhere to be found. Days passed, and it was as if she had vanished into thin air. Just when hope seemed lost, detectives uncovered a shocking truth, one that would shake the town to its core and set off a chain of events with consequences still felt today. Joan D'Alessandro was born on September 7, 1965, in the quiet town of Hillsdale, New Jersey. She had a loving family, her parents and two older brothers, and a childhood filled with warmth, faith, and laughter. Joan was bright, kind, and full of energy. She made friends easily, did well in school, and had a deep love for ballet and the arts. She also loved being a Girl Scout. It wasn't just about earning badges or going on outdoor adventures. She loved the sense of community, the friendships, and the fun. One of the biggest traditions of the Girl Scouts was selling cookies. The girls would go door to door in their neighborhood, chatting with neighbors and raising money for their troop. April 19, 1973 was Maundy Thursday, and since Joan's school was closed for the holiday, she spent the day at home with her mom. It was an ordinary afternoon. She played outside in the yard, enjoying the warm spring weather. Around 3 p.m., she noticed one of their neighbors pulling into the driveway in a brand new car. Joan had a few boxes of cookies left to deliver, and without wasting any time, she ran inside, grabbed them, and told her mom she'd be back in just a few minutes, but she never returned. At first, her mom wasn't too worried. Kids often lost track of time playing with their friends, and their neighborhood was a safe, quiet place where parents didn't think twice about letting their children roam freely. But as the minutes turned into an hour, worry began to creep in. The sky had darkened, and a light rain had started to fall. Maybe Joan had ducked into a friend's house to wait out the weather? The rain passed quickly, but Joan was still nowhere to be seen. By the time her dad came home from work, panic had fully set in. He immediately jumped into his car and started driving through the neighborhood, calling her name, scanning the streets for any sign of his little girl. Meanwhile, Joan's mom tried to figure out where she might have gone. Joan had taken the list of cookie deliveries with her, but her mother remembered something. Joan had mentioned that she was going to a neighbor's house, someone who had just arrived home in a new car. Her mom immediately thought of a family just a few houses down, the only ones in the neighborhood with a brand new vehicle. She rushed over, knocking on their door, hoping to find Joan safe and sound, but they hadn't seen her. One by one, she checked with other neighbors, anyone who might have ordered cookies or seen her daughter that afternoon. But the answer was always the same. No one had seen Joan. With no leads and no sign of their daughter, Joan's parents made the call they had been dreading. They contacted the police. Officers wasted no time launching a massive search operation. The local fire department sent out crews to help, and police officers went door to door across a several-mile radius, desperately hoping that someone had seen Joan. But no one had. What made this even more unsettling was the location. Joan's street led directly to a busy shopping center, with cars constantly passing through. It was the kind of place where someone would have noticed a young girl walking alone. And yet, nothing. As the hours dragged on, the community came together in full force. Dozens, then hundreds of people poured into the streets, flashlights in hand, calling Joan's name, checking every backyard, every alley, every possible hiding place. By midnight, local authorities called in reinforcements. The FBI and state police arrived, search dogs were brought in, and every possible lead was chased down. Volunteers combed through abandoned lots, empty houses, nearby forests, parks, even the shores of a local lake. But there was nothing, not a single clue. At first, investigators considered the possibility that Joan had simply wandered too far from home and gotten lost. But as the night stretched into the early hours of the morning, an awful realization set in. If she had just been lost, they would have found her by now. Something else had happened. The police were now certain. Joan hadn't just disappeared. Someone had taken her. Joan's mother never believed, not even for a second, that her daughter had wandered off on her own. Joan was the kind of child who followed the rules. She never went far without permission, and when she said she'd be back in a few minutes, she meant it. That's why her mother was convinced something terrible had happened. By 3 a.m., after hours of searching with no results, police decided to pause and resume at sunrise. As the sun came up, even more volunteers joined in. It seemed like the entire town had come together for Joan. Women who couldn't physically help with the search still found ways to contribute, preparing over 2,000 meals for the search teams throughout the day. Nearly every officer in the police department was involved, along with 250 firefighters from neighboring towns and several FBI teams. That day, searchers combed through every possible place Joan could be. They checked every home, yard, garage, and shed, anywhere a little girl might be. But despite their relentless efforts, there was still no sign of her. Then, a possible breakthrough, one of the search teams discovered a child's shoe less than a mile from Joan's home. It looked just like the ones she had been wearing when she left the house. Nearby, they also found several empty boxes of Girl Scout cookies, the same kind Joan had been selling. Hoping for answers, police immediately showed the shoe to Joan's mother. But the moment she saw it, her heart sank. It wasn't Joan's. Investigators then examined the cookie boxes and determined they had likely been there for weeks. Eventually, local residents came forward and confirmed that the shoe belonged to their child. Just like that, what seemed like a major lead turned into another dead end, and investigators were back to square one. Despite the hundreds of volunteers, the extensive searches, and the unwavering determination, the second full day of searching ended without answers. Meanwhile, the FBI was beginning to focus more and more on the possibility of foul play. After speaking with Joan's mother, detectives learned something crucial. She had already visited every neighbor where Joan might have delivered cookies. Every single one had said the same thing. Joan never came to their house that day. There was no sign of her. No cookies, no deliveries, nothing. But there was something else. Joan's mother shared a gut feeling she had, a suspicion that had been nagging at her since the very beginning. Before Joan left the house, she mentioned she was heading to a neighbor's home, the one who had just pulled into their driveway in a new car. As far as her mother knew, there was only one household nearby that had recently purchased a vehicle: the McGowans. So when Joan first went missing, her mother had gone straight to their house. There, she met 26-year-old Joseph McGowan, who lived with his mother and grandmother. When she asked if he had seen Joan, he told her no. But something about him didn't sit right. His behavior, his tone. She couldn't explain it, but she had a terrible feeling about him. Detectives had already spoken to Joseph once, and he had denied any involvement in Joan's disappearance. But as the hours passed, those gut feelings, both from Joan's mother and from law enforcement, only grew stronger. Joseph's story didn't seem to hold up. He kept tripping over details, struggling to keep his alibi straight. Yet there was no hard evidence against him. Nothing in his home connected him to Joan. He also had no criminal record. In fact, his background was the complete opposite of what one might expect from a suspect in a case like this. He was a well-respected school chemistry teacher with a good reputation in the community. But something still felt off. Eventually, detectives brought him into the station for a polygraph test. Joseph agreed, sitting down to answer their questions. But the results weren't what he was hoping for. The test flagged multiple signs of deception on nearly every key question. Unfortunately, polygraph results weren't admissible as solid evidence. They couldn't convict him based on that alone, but they could use it to push him further. When detectives told Joseph that he had failed, they pressed him harder. They needed him to come clean. Then, something unexpected happened. Joseph broke down, and to everyone's surprise, he made a request. "Bring me a priest," he said. Detectives obliged, and after speaking with the priest in private, everything changed. Joseph finally broke down and confessed to what really happened that day. According to his story, he had been outside mowing the lawn when Joan approached him with a few boxes of cookies. He said he had pre-ordered them weeks earlier, so he invited her inside to pay. But from this point, Joseph's account took a bizarre turn. He claimed that when he realized he didn't have the exact amount of cash to pay her, he suddenly became overwhelmed with frustration and shame. For reasons he couldn't explain, he snapped. He grabbed Joan and dragged her to his bedroom, where he brutally attacked her and committed unspeakable acts. The detectives, of course, didn't believe this part of his story for a second. His excuse made no sense. No one would react so violently over something so trivial. But they let him continue his confession, knowing that the more he talked, the more he'd reveal. Joseph said that after realizing the gravity of what he had done, panic set in. He knew that if he let Joan go, his life would be over. So, instead of facing the consequences, he decided to get rid of her. After several failed attempts, he ultimately killed Joan, wrapped her body in an old sofa cover, and placed her in the trunk of his car. He then cleaned up the blood in his bedroom, stuffed the cleaning rags into a bag, and drove nearly 20 miles away to a national park in neighboring New York State. There, deep in the woods, he carried Joan's body behind a large rock and left her there. On his way back, he disposed of the rags and other evidence in random trash bins along the road. And then, in a twisted display of deception, Joseph returned home and acted as if nothing had happened. Later that night, when Joan's mother knocked on his door looking for her daughter, he calmly told her he hadn't seen the little girl. He even joined the community's search efforts, pretending to care as he walked alongside neighbors who were desperately trying to find Joan. But perhaps the most chilling part of his confession came at the end. Joseph told detectives that, despite everything he had done, he felt completely calm that night. He had no trouble falling asleep at all. While some details of his story seemed questionable, investigators' main priority was now finding Joan's body. They contacted New York Park Services, and Joseph provided them with precise directions to the location. Thanks to this, the search took less than an hour. Joan's body was found exactly where he said it would be, behind a large rock in a remote wooded area. But when medical examiners began their work, more inconsistencies in Joseph's account came to light. During his interrogation, Joseph insisted that he had not sexually assaulted Joan. But forensic evidence told a different story. There was undeniable proof that he had. His version of the events also contradicted the physical evidence in other ways. He claimed he had simply attacked her in a fit of rage, yet forensic experts found multiple injuries and bruises that suggested a prolonged, violent struggle. And then there was the most glaring contradiction of all. Joan's body was found completely unclothed. Even when detectives confronted him with this detail, Joseph continued to deny any sexual assault. For Joseph's family and friends, the entire situation was beyond comprehension. They had always seen him as a quiet, intelligent, and kind person. The idea that he was capable of something so monstrous was unthinkable. His colleagues at the elementary school where he worked as a chemistry teacher were equally stunned. To them, Joseph had always been a well-respected and well-educated teacher who had never shown any signs of trouble. But the residents of Hillsdale had no doubts about his guilt. In the days following his arrest, dozens of furious locals gathered outside his house. Most weren't violent, but the police still decided to block off the entire street, worried that someone might try to harm his mother or grandmother. Some residents were so outraged that they even flipped through phone books looking for anyone with the last name McGowan, making angry phone calls to complete strangers. Many of these people had no connection to Joseph, yet they became targets of the town's collective fury. Several families even filed complaints saying these threatening calls were making their lives unbearable. The anger only grew when the judge set Joseph's bail at $50,000. That was a huge sum at the time, but for the people of Hillsdale, it wasn't enough. Hundreds of residents flooded the court with letters, demanding that bail be revoked. The thought of Joseph walking free, even temporarily, was unthinkable, but surprisingly, not everyone agreed. Some believed that, despite the horror of his crime, Joseph should have the right to post bail. Some residents were actually hoping Joseph would be released, not because they believed he was innocent, but because they wanted to take justice into their own hands. Under immense public pressure, the court eventually changed its decision and revoked his bail, even though his family had already managed to gather the necessary amount. In the end, Joseph was kept in jail while awaiting trial, placed in solitary confinement for his own safety, as many inmates were eager to harm him. Several months after his arrest, the trial finally began. Joseph pleaded guilty to the murder but continued to deny the sexual assault. He insisted that the crime was a spontaneous act, claiming he had no idea what came over him. The prosecution, however, wasn't buying it. Before the trial, several psychiatrists had evaluated Joseph. Their conclusions were chilling. They believed he had harbored dark, monstrous desires for years, hiding them behind the facade of a normal, well-adjusted life. But when the opportunity arose to act on his fantasies, he didn't hesitate. There was also speculation that the crime wasn't as impulsive as Joseph claimed. The fact that he had hidden Joan's body deep in the woods behind a large rock raised serious doubts that he had chosen the spot on a whim. Investigators strongly believed that he had known about the location long before the crime, keeping it in mind as a convenient place to dispose of a body. By the end of the trial, Joseph was sentenced to life in prison, but there was a catch. At the time, the law allowed for parole, even for someone like him, which meant the case was far from over. Nearly 20 years later, Joseph became eligible for parole, causing outrage among Joan's family. Her parents hadn't even been aware this was an option. To make matters worse, their attorney warned them that if they didn't take action to oppose his release, there was a strong chance he would walk free. The problem was that over the years, Joseph had undergone multiple psychiatric evaluations, and every single one concluded that he was no longer a threat to society. Adding to his case was his spotless behavior in prison. He had never caused trouble or violated any rules. Desperate to keep him behind bars, Joan's mother fought with everything she had. She not only worked to convince the parole board that Joseph didn't deserve to be released, but also launched a campaign to change the law, ensuring that criminals like him would never get the chance for parole again. After years of relentless advocacy, she succeeded. A new law was passed in New Jersey, making anyone convicted of murdering a child under 14 for the purpose of sexual assault permanently ineligible for parole. The following year, a federal version of the law was enacted, largely thanks to her efforts. However, the law didn't apply retroactively, meaning Joseph was still eligible for parole. But despite this, Joan's mother managed to convince the court to deny his release. Then, in 1999, another parole hearing came up, and this time, something unexpected happened. Before the decision was made, Joseph underwent another psychiatric evaluation. During these conversations, he suddenly changed the story he had been sticking to for over 20 years. Initially, he had claimed that he attacked Joan out of frustration when he couldn't find the right amount of change. That explanation had never been particularly convincing, but now Joseph admitted it was a lie. According to him, he had been struggling with personal issues at the time. He was unhappy with his job, dissatisfied with his life, and feeling generally miserable. When Joan knocked on his door, he claimed he simply decided to take out his anger on her, leading him to commit the crime. Despite this new explanation, the court once again denied his parole. Over the following years, Joseph continued to petition for early release, but each time, his requests were rejected. During one of his final attempts to secure parole, he agreed to an interview with John Douglas, a former FBI agent and renowned criminal profiler whose work inspired The Silence of the Lambs and shows like Mindhunter. Douglas, who had interviewed infamous serial killers like Charles Manson, assessed whether Joseph was fit to re-enter society. His conclusion was clear. Joseph remained a significant danger to those around him. He described Joseph's uncontrollable urges as deeply disturbing. Using his unique approach, Douglas managed to earn Joseph's trust, uncovering something even more unsettling in the process. At one point, Joseph bragged about having more than $600,000. He explained that after his mother and grandmother passed away, he received sizable payouts and sold their house. But what was most disturbing was what he did with the money. Joseph revealed that he had moved all of it to a bank in neighboring New York State, specifically to prevent Joan's mother from ever being able to access a single penny through civil lawsuits. He had been quietly securing funds for legal representation, ensuring he could continue fighting for his release. Douglas was so struck by this conversation that he later wrote an entire book about the case. Joseph's last attempt to secure parole was in 2008, with his next hearing scheduled for 2025. Joan's mother was preparing for another battle, ready to oppose his release once again. But she didn't have to. In 2021, Joseph died in prison at the age of 74. In the end, he spent most of his life behind bars and remained there until his death. As for Joan's mother, her fight for justice never stopped. A few years ago, she successfully pushed to raise the age limit in her original law from 14 to 18 in New Jersey. She also helped pass another law in the state, one that completely removed the statute of limitations for murder cases. On top of her legal advocacy, she founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting children, a mission that has had a profound impact over the years. And she has no plans of slowing down. For her, this fight isn't just about what happened to Joan. It's about protecting thousands of other children from suffering the same fate. What do you think about this case? Do you think there's more to the story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more true crime content. Thanks for watching.